The first time it happened, he barely noticed. A faint, uneven pulse in the silence of night, like the sound of distant machinery behind a wall. He had just closed his eyes, wrapped in that strange, weightless state before sleep took hold. Then thump, not his heartbeat. His heart beat steady in his chest, the familiar rhythm of his own body. But this was something else, fainter, deeper, an echo trapped within him. He held his breath and listened. It came again, slow, steady, a pulse entirely its own. He placed a hand over his chest. His heartbeat thudded beneath his palm, strong and real. But the second one, it was somewhere else, hidden, unreachable. He turned onto his side, shifting beneath the sheets. His ribs ached, though he didn't know why. It was probably nothing. Maybe digestion, maybe a muscle spasm. He closed his eyes again. In the silence, the second heartbeat continued. Days passed, but the sensation did not fade. He felt it always, lurking beneath his skin, a constant, steady rhythm just out of reach. He searched for it obsessively, pressing his fingers against his throat, his wrists, his stomach, but he never found it. Yet it was there. He felt it in moments of stillness, in the quiet spaces between his own breaths. It moved sometimes, shifting like a worm burrowing through his flesh. Some nights it settled deep in his gut, a dull and persistent throb between his intestines. Other nights it crawled upward, pressing into his ribs, pulsing in the hollow spaces of his bones. He told himself it was stress, anxiety maybe. He had been overworked lately, stretched thin. He needed to sleep, to eat better. But sleep brought no relief. The heartbeat grew louder. By the second week, it dominated his mind. A deep, invasive thump-thump, its presence impossible to ignore. It no longer waited for stillness. It followed him through the day, through work, through meals, through restless nights of staring at the ceiling. His body ached. His skin felt stretched, feverish. His stomach cramped, rejecting food. His breath came short, like something inside was pressing against his lungs. The worst was the hunger. It gnawed at him, deep and insatiable. He ate and ate, stuffing himself until he felt sick, but the hunger never faded. It wasn't normal hunger, it wasn't in his stomach. It was something deeper, something primal and wrong, rooted in his very core. One night, he woke with a mouthful of blood. His teeth throbbed. His jaw ached. He stumbled to the bathroom and flipped on the light. His gums were torn, shredded. His inner cheeks bore deep, oozing bite marks. He had been chewing his own flesh in his sleep. A sickness rose inside him. He gripped the sink, staring at his pale, hollow-eyed reflection, his lips smeared with red. His hands trembled. And then he saw it. A ripple beneath his skin, a movement, a shifting, unnatural bulge beneath his ribs, pressing outward. The second heartbeat pounded, harder, louder, and for the first time he knew with sickening certainty it wasn't a second heart, it was something else. His body was no longer his own. The veins in his arms bulged, dark and twisted, snaking along his flesh like writhing roots. His muscles twitched beneath his skin, spasming at random. His stomach swelled at odd hours, ballooning tight before deflating again. His chest ached. The pressure behind his ribs grew unbearable, like something was pushing against them from the inside. The second heartbeat was no longer faint. It hammered, sending thick, rhythmic shocks through his body. One night, he collapsed in bed, too weak to move. He curled in on himself, hands gripping his sides as his body clenched and spasmed, his ribs stretched, his skin bulging as something inside shifted. Then came the tearing, a deep, visceral rip from within, not just pain, an unravelling, a sick, wet splitting in his muscle, his sinew, his very being. He gasped, arching, fingers clawing at his own flesh as the thing inside pushed. His ribs cracked apart like a wet carcass split for butchering. His skin peeled, stretched too thin, something emerging. Not a heart, not a second organ, a thing. A glistening, pulsating mass of raw, wet flesh, slick with the remnants of his insides. Veins slithered across its surface, pulsing like the limbs of a dying insect. It shuddered, inhaling, exhaling, moving. And then it opened, not with eyes, not with a mouth, but with hunger. The second heartbeat was no longer inside him. It was outside, and it was still growing.